the demos and its demons. The first thing to keep in mind in order to understand Plato's analysis of democracy is that he is not primarily concerned with procedural matters, such as the way in which people are elected or policies decided upon. What he cares about, again, is the character type that predominates in a society. By democracy, what Plato has in mind is a libertarian and egalitarian society in which every individual is free to do as he likes. Bourgeois restraints on appetite disappear, so that desires are checked only by competing desires, rather than by reason, spirit, or even the oligarch's middle-class stolidity. Democracy, as Plato describes it, is basically what American society has become in the 21st century. So much so that reading Plato on democracy makes one wonder whether he had access to a time machine. Democracy, on Plato's account, is characterized by the diversity of its characters and treats all men as equal, whether they are equal or not. In particular, it treats all ways of life as equal, no matter how puerile, irrational, or immoral. The young throw off all inhibitions and celebrate insolence, license, extravagance, and shamelessness. They flit faddishly from one activity to another. At one moment, they will pursue wine, women, and song, and at the next, water to drink and a strict diet. A keen interest in hard physical training might give way to indolence and careless ease. Today they will devote themselves to philosophical study, tomorrow politics, and the day after that, business. If anyone tries to tell them that some desires are bad and should be suppressed, they won't listen, but insist that all pleasures are equal and should have equal rights. This licentiousness and egalitarianism become ever more extreme. Citizens care nothing about the character of their leaders so long as they flatter the people. This yields rulers who behave like subjects and subjects who behave like rulers. Authority disintegrates. Fathers and sons change places in social status, the father standing in awe of his son, and the son neither respecting nor fearing his parents. In general, the young set themselves against their elders, while elders fear being thought disagreeable or strict, and are reduced to pathetically aping the young and mixing with them on terms of easy fellowship. The teacher fears and panders to his pupils, but the pupils despise him anyway. Democratic man insists on complete equality and liberty in the relations between the sexes, and on drawing no distinction between alien and citizen and foreigner. Plato tells us that license is extended even to domestic animals, who freely roam the streets of the democratic city. The end result is that the minds of the citizens become so sensitive that the least vestige of restraint is resented as intolerable. In the end, in their determination to have no master, the citizens of a democracy disregard all laws, written or unwritten. This democratic lawlessness, Plato tells us, is the root from which tyranny springs. It is crucial to understand that this is not merely because of the chaos that results when laws and mores are no longer respected, which leads people to opt for a strong man to restore order. It has to do with the deep irrationalism of egalitarian societies. They are dominated not by reason, not by spirit, not even by the more governable appetites of the oligarch, but by the lower and unruly appetites for sex, food, drink, and sensual pleasure in general, which are most prone to blinding reason. The very idea of a natural order of things that determines that some desires are disordered and forbidden by reason becomes hateful to democratic man. This is the significance of Plato's famous allegory of the cave. The cave dwellers are chained in such a way that they can see nothing but shadowy images on the wall cast by statues and flickering flames. The statues are representations of everyday objects outside the cave, dogs, cats, trees, and so on. When a cave dweller escapes and makes his way outside the cave, he finds that what he and his fellows had thought to be reality is really only faint and distorted images of copies of real things. He returns to the cave and tries to explain this to them, but they judge him to be crazy and are so offended by his criticism of their false beliefs that they seek to kill him. Now, the cave dwellers in this allegory stand for the citizens of a democracy like the Athens of Plato's day, and the shadows on the wall represent the illusory belief system of democratic psyches, which are dominated by appetite and swayed by the rhetoric of the sophists and demagogues who flatter them and help rationalize their disordered desires. Plato characterizes their delusions as dead weights that are fastened on them by sensual indulgences like gluttony, which twist their mind's vision to lower things. The man who escapes is the Platonic philosopher, for whom Plato's model is Socrates. The objects in the ordinary world outside the cave represent the forms or natures of things, as understood in light of Plato's essentialism. The sun that illuminates these objects corresponds to what Plato calls the form of the good, which is the divine source of the forms. The hostility of the cave dwellers to the escapee represents the hostility of citizens of a democracy to the philosopher who exposes their egalitarian delusions, such as Socrates, who was murdered by democratic Athens. Plato warns that art and music characterized by ugliness of form and bad rhythm and disharmony, and a popular culture that glorifies bad character, ill discipline, meanness, or ugliness, do cumulative psychological damage, corrupting moral sensibilities and capacity for rational argument. The same is true, he says, of a preoccupation with pleasure-seeking, which inclines a soul toward frenzy and excess, and violence and indiscipline, and he warns that this is especially true of sexual pleasure. The culture of a healthy society must accordingly celebrate reason, beauty, goodness, and restraint. The improper formation of character yields what Plato calls misology, or hatred of rational discourse, generating citizens with no use for reasoned discussion, and an animal addiction to settle everything by brute force. The applicability to modern American pop culture is obvious, and only the details need updating. The walls of Plato's cave have been replaced with cell phones streaming Netflix and pornography, and misology now manifests itself in Twitter mobs and cancel culture rather than the executioner's hemlock. For the moment, anyway.